One thing China does best is claiming other countries' territories and bullying smaller economies. The Chinese government knows that most of its neighboring countries can't match its power in terms of military strength. Just look at their behavior with Taiwan and the Philippines. With the Philippines, the Chinese Coast Guard had bladed weapons, while the Filipino personnel fought with bare hands. They were outnumbered, and the Chinese personnel even stole 7 disassembled rifles stored in gun cases. They destroyed an outboard motor, communication, and navigation equipment, and took the personal cell phones of the Filipino personnel. This isn't what a professional navy does, this is what pirates do. And it's not the first time they've used these tactics. They tried it with India, but failed. Back in 2017, China unilaterally started constructing roads and extending an existing road southward on the Doklam Plateau. Bhutan, being a tiny nation, depends on India for defense. So India responded by sending 270 troops with weapons and 2 bulldozers to Doklam to stop the Chinese troops from constructing the road. Months went by with both the Indian and Chinese armies locked in a standoff. Eventually, the Indian troops withdrew back to their original positions at their outpost at Doklam, which is in a strategically advantageous spot on the Bhutanese border, less than 500 meters down the ridge slope. The Chinese did the same and stopped the construction. Thus, the pre-June 2017 status quo was restored without any bloodshed. However, we can't say the same for what happened in 2020. Starting on 5 May 2020, Chinese and Indian troops engaged in aggressive melee, face-offs, and skirmishes at various locations along the Sino-Indian border, including near Pangong Lake in Ladakh and the Chinese-occupied Tibet region. In late May, tensions escalated at the line of actual control, with increased troop deployments by both India and China. India claimed China had encroached upon its territory. On June 6, local military commanders agreed on a disengagement process. However, while creating a buffer zone, an Indian commander discovered a Chinese camp, leading to a violent clash and casualties on June 15. China, trying to save face internationally, claimed only 4 of its soldiers died, but the actual number was much higher. India reported that over 40 PLA soldiers were killed, while an Australian newspaper indicated that at least 38 PLA troops were washed away and drowned that night. In retaliation for the Galwan clash, India swiftly banned 59 Chinese apps, including TikTok. Then on 7 September 2020, the PLA attempted to provoke India once more. Approximately 60 PLA soldiers, armed with rods, spears, clubs, and a pole weapon known as the Guandao, took up aggressive positions. These were the same weapons used during the Galwan Valley clash. The Chinese PLA uses these weapons because of the no-firing agreement at the line of actual control. However, despite this agreement, the Chinese fired 15 to 20 rounds in the air. Following that incident, several unreported clashes occurred on the India-China border, this time in the Tawang sector of Arunachal Pradesh, where Chinese troops tried to cross into Indian territory. In one such instance, the Indian army thwarted the Chinese with sticks and bricks, pushing them back. This is the daily reality the Indian military faces. Now, after failing to intimidate India, China is using the same tactics against the Philippines. China never truly intends to resolve issues, whether with smaller countries in Southeast Asia or with South Asia. By maintaining a hardline stance and not resolving disputes, China increases its leverage in negotiations, allowing it to extract concessions or favorable terms when it eventually engages in diplomatic talks. In response, India is becoming more aggressive in dealing with China, both militarily and diplomatically. India initially banned direct flights from China in early 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and has maintained the ban on direct flights from China, despite China urging India to restart direct passenger flights. However, India maintains that unless there is peace and tranquility on the border, the rest of the relationship cannot move forward. The Indian military has undertaken its own buildup along the border. In 2021, New Delhi redirected approximately 50,000 troops to the line of actual control. The Indian Air Force also remains operationally deployed near the border, including nearly 1,430 miles of road in Arunachal Pradesh, in which Beijing claims as southern Tibet. Additionally, several tunnels are being built to facilitate quicker transportation to border regions. The Indian government also launched its Vibrant Villages campaign last year to develop important infrastructure in villages on its side of the contested border. The hard reality is that both sides are militarizing the border. In response to a persistent and growing Chinese threat, India has begun rebalancing its army from Pakistan to the LAC. As a result, we can expect a larger and more permanent presence from both Chinese and Indian forces in the coming year. China loves to claim other countries' territories, often releasing new maps to fit their agenda. They even rename parts of Arunachal Pradesh as a form of psychological warfare. In reaction to China's recent renaming of locations in Arunachal Pradesh, the Indian government has launched its own effort to rename approximately 30 places within Chinese-occupied Tibet. But why does China claim Arunachal Pradesh? The actual reason is the mighty Brahmaputra River. China faces significant freshwater scarcity issues. While 2/3 of the Brahmaputra's basin lies within China, the country contributes only about 20% to the river's total flow. The majority of the water is collected in the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh and other downstream areas. This makes India a significant contributor to the river's volume despite its smaller geographical share. Indian leaders regularly visit Arunachal Pradesh, including occasional visits by the Prime Minister, which China protests every time. These protests have no solid basis. Remember when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan? China was furious with the US, as her visit clearly signaled American support for Taiwan. Recently, the Indian government allowed Nancy Pelosi to meet the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala. And once again, China reacted with anger, urging the US not to sign the Tibet bill as it sends a strong message to China.
So will the President Biden sign this bill very soon?
Yes, he will. He will. Yep.
This bill promotes dialogue between Beijing and the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. Recently, the US president made it official by signing the bill into law, a move that has angered China. During the G20 Summit in India, China expressed its displeasure over the border issue by skipping the event. In contrast, Russian President Vladimir Putin also missed the summit, but for obvious reasons. Since his declaration of a special military operation against Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Putin has skipped several international meetings, including the G20 Summit in Bali and the recent BRICS Summit in Johannesburg, where Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov led the Russian delegation. The G20 Summit was particularly ambitious for India, as it marked the first time the country hosted the event. However, Xi Jinping's absence was not just about friction with the US, it also served as a snub to India. Not attending a high-profile event can serve as a form of diplomatic signaling. China might have used its absence from the G20 summit to express its dissatisfaction with specific policies or actions taken by India or the G20 as a whole. In response, Prime Minister Modi chose not to participate in the recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, despite India being a member. Since Russia launched its war against Ukraine, very few countries have supported Russia militarily. Iran has supplied Russia with cheap drones, and now North Korea has joined in support. Additionally, China is aiding Russia by supplying dual-use technology for Putin's war efforts. Recently, NATO described China as a decisive enabler in Russia's war on Ukraine. However, there's another perspective. Russia is also supplying advanced weapons to China's adversaries. For example, the supersonic BrahMos anti-ship cruise missile is considered one of the best ship-killing weapons available. Even with multi-layered air defense systems, there is no guarantee that they can intercept the missile. Its resistance to jamming and electronic countermeasures enhances its effectiveness against advanced defenses. The BrahMos missile is a joint venture between Russia and India. Similar to the Israeli Arrow missile defense system developed between Israel and the United States. When India requested the Israeli Arrow systems, approval was complicated due to the joint venture status, and the US did not grant permission. Likewise, India needs Russian approval to export BrahMos missiles to third parties. Russia has a long-standing and strategic partnership with India, which includes defense cooperation. Supporting India's defense exports strengthens this alliance. While Russia and China have a close relationship, Russia also values its partnership with India as a counterbalance. This balancing act is crucial for Russia's strategic autonomy. Now, the Philippines is set to acquire HIMARS and more BrahMos missiles in the coming years, marking a significant shift in regional defense dynamics. India is ramping up its activities in the South China Sea, significantly expanding its maritime engagement with Southeast Asia as part of a broader strategy in the Indo-Pacific, aligned with the Act East policy and ASEAN cooperation. Recently, 3 ships from the Indian Navy completed a strategic mission in the South China Sea. This task force included a destroyer, a fleet tanker, and an anti-submarine corvette, all part of the Navy's Eastern Fleet. During their deployment, these vessels visited key ports, starting with Singapore and then continuing to Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Brunei. By projecting its naval power not only in its immediate vicinity, but also at China's doorstep, India is sending a clear message. It is ready to assert its influence in a region long dominated by Chinese aggression. This naval maneuvering is likely to raise concerns in Beijing, especially as regional navies are increasingly preparing for a coordinated pushback. This assertiveness is not just about regional stability, it's a signal that India is ready to stand firm against any attempts at intimidation from its northern neighbor.